couple of times in the last few years, I've taken you into my home garden and kind of shown you some of the things I've got going on. We've primarily looked at my collection of native plants here in these two raised beds here out in my landscape. And if you look at them now, there's not a lot going on. I've got a little prairie senecio starting to bloom there and some of the native larkspur sending up a few blooms, but other than that, everything's going to be a little bit later before it starts to flower. Well, I wanted to show you what I've got going on a little bit north of this native garden. I decided to put in a formal garden. And of course, the formal style is that of straight lines, sort of geometrical shapes in the beds and the pathways that I've got here, some squares, some triangles, and some other shapes like that. And I started out on this project in the late summer last year. I came out here and I sprayed all of the turf, all that Bermuda grass with a non-selective herbicide like glyphosate, made sure all that Bermuda was dead before I started this project. Then back in January, I came out here with my tractor and I scraped off all the soil and that dead Bermuda and piled it up right over here. I then took some of the soil and put back in here just to kind of level up the area. And I ended up with a level that was about 4 inches lower than the existing ground level. Well, you can see that we've started edging these beds and we're using railroad ties. And I like this material. It sort of fits our garden. It's sort of rustic. And if you look around our place here, we've got these old rusty barns and we've got some other garden structures made out of cedar and old posts and things like that. So the weathered look of the cross ties or the railroad ties was perfect for edging this garden. Now there are a few things to think about whenever you're using railroad ties, whenever you're landscaping with those. The first thing you want to make sure is that you get those that are weathered. You want the old used ties that are somewhat faded. You don't want them dripping with that black creosote because that's actually toxic to the plants. Now another thing to remember is when you're cutting those with something like a chainsaw, it'll dull the blade pretty quick. And if you think about it, the cross ties, they're lying on a bed of granite rock for years and years and years, and with all the cracks and fissures, it's inevitable that some gravel is going to get down in there. You can see some pieces of gravel kind of stuck in some of the holes in this railroad tie. But whenever you're cutting those, you're very likely to hit those with the blade and it'll dull your chainsaw blade pretty quick. It's also important whenever you're going to be cutting on the railroad ties to make sure there are not any spikes or other metal in place where you're going to be making those cuts. Now another thing to think about in using railroad ties, there's a little bit of a fear that you could transport termites into your home area inside the railroad ties. Well, in Oklahoma, that's a very low risk. Now, in some of the southern states, there is documented cases where termites, the Formosan termite in particular, was moved from areas in Louisiana to other areas in the south, like Atlanta and places like that. But since that time, there's been a quarantine placed on wood products coming out of the Formosa termite area in Louisiana, and those are always slated to be burned now. In Oklahoma, we get all of our ties from states north of here, like Colorado. And again, there's very low risk of getting those termites in the railroad ties. There are Formosan termites as far north as Denton, Texas, but as yet, they've yet to be discovered in Oklahoma. Now, we do have native termites around, so just to be safe, it's a good idea to at least leave 2 or 3 feet between your house and any wooden landscape or railroad tie products in the garden. Even something like mulch, move that away from your house about 6 to 8 inches to keep those wood products from coming in contact with the home. Now there's more likely a chance of getting carpenter ants in your railroad ties here in Oklahoma, but those are far less damaging than termites, and it's a very active insect. If you're moving around the ties, those carpenter ants, those big black shiny ants, they'll be running around on the surface of the ties, and you can easily see those and treat those with an insecticide. But again, not that big of a problem. Well, the pathway that I chose to use as a material for this garden is landscape screenings, and right here you can kind of see what we've been doing with those. We just put down the landscape fabric and pin it in place, and then we come back with about 4 inches, maybe a little bit more in some areas, of these limestone screenings. And I like this as a material because it has lots of different sizes of the crushed limestone. It even has the fines or little dust-like particles. And you can see after they get wet, they settle down to the bottom. It almost sets up, almost like cement or something, but not nearly as hard. But what it does, it provides for a very, very sturdy pathway. And we put these in place and we rake them smooth with the rake, and then to firm them up a little bit, just get something like this roller and just roll that over the pathway several times, and really makes for a nice firm pathway. Now if you're worried a little bit about the pH, I haven't had a problem using the limestone screenings. In fact, in our patio garden there at our studio 5 years ago, we put limestone screenings under those pavers, and we haven't had a lot of alkalinity problems in the surrounding beds. Now with the soil in the landscape here, I firmly believe that the soil is the most important part of any landscape, because you can have the most elaborate landscape design, you can have the most spectacular plants, but if your soil is not right, it's not really going to grow. So I believe that there should be a great investment in getting your soil right. And I like to start out with sort of a sandy loam soil, or a loamy sand, very high sand containing soil. It's not true sand, but it's a soil with a lot of sand content. I put that down first, and I like to come in on top of that with several inches of organic matter. And right here, I've got an example of some compost, a good source of organic matter. And of course, organic matter, as we've talked about on our program in the past, is a great way to condition your soil. It feeds the life of the soil, the organic little microorganisms, the earthworms. It improves clay soils. It binds those little tiny flake-like clay particles that when they stack up, it makes it hard for the water and oxygen to penetrate down into the soil. But you take organic matter and you mix in with that clay, and it binds all those little flakes into crumbs or aggregates, and they sort of stack up differently in the soil, and it helps the water and the air penetrate and makes for a great root environment. Now, organic matter will also improve sandy soils. It'll help them hang on to the nutrients and hang on to the water a lot better. But compost, a great material to use as a source of organic matter. We can make this with our grass clippings, our leaves, our trimmings, anything like that. Just pile those up, let them decompose, and come up with some great organic matter in that way. Another good source of organic matter is animal manures. And I'm talking about animals that are herbivores, those animals that eat plants. Animals like cattle, horses, sheep, things like that. And whenever we use animal manure on the garden, it's a good idea to make sure it is well composted or well aged. It needs to be cooked or composted for at least 6 months to a year before we put it on the garden. If we put it on too hot, we're liable to get some ammonia burn. And also, if you're putting animal manures on your vegetable garden, you want to make sure that they've been composted at least 6 months to make sure any things like E. coli or salmonella, which are short-lived actually in the soil, will thoroughly be killed. Now, there are some other products that you can purchase and put on your garden for a source of organic matter. One is peat moss, like we've got right here. We've got a little small bale of peat moss, and you can see the product right here. This is mined from peat bogs up in Canada. Most of the peat moss that comes into the United States does come from Canada, but I really don't recommend using peat moss in our gardens. Now, you don't really have to feel guilty about using peat moss, because up in Canada, where about 25% of the world's peat bogs are, only 0.02% of those are actually being harvested. It's regulated by the industry, and practices are in place to reclaim and restore those peat bogs to keep them sustainable. But it does take a while for that peat to be built back up to where it can be harvested again. So in my opinion, I think we should leave the peat moss for the nurserymen and the greenhouse growers for their mixes to grow our plants, and I believe there are a lot better alternatives that we can use in our garden. Now, another source of organic matter that we can purchase and put on the garden is this product. This is from a company called Humalpha. This product right here is called Humor, and this is packaged and put together up in Shattuck, Oklahoma, a little town up in the northwest part of the state. But this is composted cattle manure and composted alfalfa hay, and just look how black and rich that is. Great source of organic matter for the garden. It will create all the conditions that regular organic matter does, but it gives you a bonus in that there is a naturally occurring plant growth stimulant in alfalfa. It's called tricantanol, and it's a chemical that will help increase plants' photosynthesis, their ability to form roots and to survive cold, and just does a lot of good things for the plants. A lot of orchid growers use tricantanol, and a lot of rose growers will use tricantanol in composted alfalfa around their plants, and they have really good results. But great thing to add to your garden, the composted alfalfa from this Humalpha company up in Shattuck, Oklahoma. Well, right over here is another product made in Oklahoma. This comes from the other side of the state. This comes from Miami. This Green Country brand of composted organic matter here is made up of cattle manure and composted mushrooms from that part of the state. But again, look how black and rich that is, like black gold, chocolate cake crumbs, if you will. The Green Country Corporation here provides a number of products, different composted mushroom products, a great source of organic matter if you want to purchase some of this and put it on your garden. Maybe on a smaller scale, we could purchase some of these and put on the garden. Right here, we've got another product. This is called Back to Earth, and this comes from a company down in Texas, but this is composted cotton burrs. And you can see this is leftover plant products, composted cotton plant products, and it's coarsely screened, but another great source of organic matter for the garden. And you probably get a little bit of tricantanol from the cotton as well, because it also occurs in that plant. But for my garden here, I've got a lot of area, got some really large beds, and I got a few more to build here. And it would be quite an expense if I was to buy some of these things. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some of the ready-made organic matter from my wife's horse Ranger and put some of that animal manure on my garden, and get some other horse manure from a few horse barns from friends I know to add a good source of organic matter, about 4 inches to this garden, and till that in. So again, remember, if you're putting in some new beds, some new gardens, investing in your soil is very important.